The wind screamed across the frozen Montana, plains like a wild animal trying to claw its way into the world, hurling white sheets of snow, sideways until the horizon disappeared, behind a swirling, merciless blizzard. In the midst of that raging whiteout, a tiny figure struggled forward, 8-year-old Elsie Walker, her boots too thin, her coat too big, her breath too shallow as she dragged a tattered sled behind her. On the sled lay her little brother Noah, only 4 years old. His lips blue, his fingers curled against his chest as though he were trying to hold what little warmth remained in him. Just a little farther, Elsie whispered, her voice shaking not from fear but from cold and exhaustion. She'd repeated those words for hours, the way others might whisper prayers, their cabin once filled with warmth, a fireplace crackling, and a mother humming softly was nothing but a burned skeleton now. Black beams reaching for the sky like accusing fingers. The fire had taken it swiftly, and their mother had fallen ill the next morning, her lungs filling with smoke and winter both. By dawn she was gone, leaving Elsie holding Noah's trembling hand and staring at the only world she had left, the endless, frozen frontier. She had no plan, only a rumor her mother had whispered many nights before. Across the ridge lives a man richer than the governor, richer than the railroadmen, a rancher who owns more land than the sky has stars. They say he's cold as the snow, but he never turns away a hungry person. If things ever get bad, Elsie, you take Noah and you go to him. Elsie hadn't believed it then. But now things are bad didn't even begin to describe their nightmare. With the storm closing in behind them and Noah's breathing growing shallow, she had no choice. She secured Noah on the sled, wrapped him with the last wool blanket they had saved from the fire, and stepped into the storm that swallowed their home. Hunger gnawed at her belly, but the weight in her chest was heavier, the terror of losing her brother. Noah was all she had left. Their father had died the year before in a logging accident, leaving their mother to work the fields, fix the fences, and stretch every penny into a miracle. And now she too was gone. Elsie felt smaller than ever, no bigger than a twig being blown across an endless field. Hours passed. Her legs burned, her eyelashes froze together, and her fingers bare. Even as she tried to pull her sleeves, down had turned a frightening shade of purple. Noah whimpered occasionally, each sound slicing a new wound into her soul. "Don't fall asleep," she begged him. Mom said not to. "You stay awake, okay? We're almost there. We're almost." But she didn't know where there was anymore. The wind had erased every landmark. The world was a blank sheet of white, and she was scribbling across it blindly. Elsie collapsed twice, each time forcing herself back up with a burst of will that came from the same place. Mothers find strength to lift carriages off trapped children. But she wasn't anyone's mother. She was just a scared little girl doing everything she could to play the role fate had shoved upon her. And fate is cruel, but sometimes, just sometimes, it sends miracles in the shape of men few would ever expect. Lightning cracked across the sky, or at least it sounded like lightning. The frozen plains shouldn't have thunder, but the noise came again, deeper, closer, a rumble like a beast. Elsie blinked snowflakes from her lashes and looked up. At first she thought it was a mountain moving toward her, huge, dark, hulking. Then the shape resolved, breaking through the haze of snow, and her breath caught. A horse, a massive stallion, black as midnight, and riding atop him a giant of a man, wrapped in a long duster coat, broad-shouldered, towering, bearded, with eyes that glowed like cold embers in the storm. The horse slowed, snorted, and the man reined him in only a few feet away. Snow swirled around them, creating a ghostly halo. Elsie froze, trembling, not from fear, but from the overwhelming relief that this must be him. The mythical figure her mother had spoken of. The millionaire rancher, Elias Hart, a man whose wealth was whispered across the state like a legend. Cattle empire, king, oil fields, mountains of timberland, fleets of workers. But those stories were always followed by darker ones: his dead wife, his abandoned son, his cold heart, his vow never to let anyone close again. People said his soul had frozen over long before the winters ever did. Yet here he was, stopping for a half-frozen girl and her dying brother in the middle of the storm. His voice boomed through the wind. "What in God's name are you doing out here?" Elsie tried to speak, but her voice cracked, tangled somewhere between a sob and a gasp. "Please." "My brother, he's starving. We don't have a home anymore. The fire took everything. I was looking for you. People said you help people." Elias stared at her with an unreadable expression. Snowflakes clung to his beard like tiny stars. For a long moment she thought he'd turn away, that his reputation for being heartless meant he'd leave them to freeze. But then something soft, just barely in the shadows of his eyes. He jumped off the horse in one swift motion, his boots crunching into the snow. When he lifted Noah from the sled, the boy looked impossibly small against the man's massive chest. Elias's jaw tightened. This child's half dead, he muttered. You do. How long have you been walking? Since morning, Elsie whispered. I didn't know where else to go. Elias didn't waste another second. He swept Elsie off her feet with the same gentleness he might used to lift a newborn, full, and placed her on the horse. Then he mounted behind her, holding Noah against his chest with one arm while guiding the reins with the other, wrapping his coat around all three of them to shield them from the wind. Hang on, he said gruffly. My ranch is 5 miles out. Storm's only getting worse. 5 miles sounded like forever. But in Elias Hart's arms, warmth radiated through Elsie like she had stepped into a miracle. She tucked her frozen hands under his coat, feeling the steady thudding of his heartbeat sound stronger and safer than anything she'd ever known. For the first time since the fire, she let herself close her eyes, trusting the giant cowboy behind her. Elias urged the horse forward, cutting through the blizzard like a force of nature. The world around them was still vicious, but compared to the cold cruelty of being alone, this felt almost like hope. As they rode, Elias glanced down at the 2 frail children pressed against him. Something inside him, a part he had locked away for years, shuddered awake. He hadn't held a child since his own son died 3 winters ago, stolen by pneumonia, leaving Elias with nothing but silence and a house built too big for one man. He'd vowed never to care again, never to feel again. Yet here he was, risking his life in a storm, because a little girl with fire in her eyes had stumbled into his path. After what felt like hours, lights finally flickered in the distance, warm, golden lights. The Hart Ranch. Dozens of barns, cabins, and the massive mansion that served as its heart. Workers rushed outside as Elias approached, recognizing the urgency instantly. Warm blankets? He barked. Hot broth. Get Doc Kinsley here, now. Hands reached up to take Noah gently from Elias's arms, and Elsie tried to climb down alone, but her legs buckled. Elias caught her instantly, lifting her like she weighed nothing. You're safe now, he rumbled. Both of you. Will Noah be okay? She asked, her voice trembling. Elias looked down at her, for the first time in years. He didn't give the world his usual cold, distant stare. Instead, he gave her something else, something she desperately needed. Hope. I won't let him die, Elias said. Not while you're under my roof. And in that moment, as her frozen tears thawed on her cheeks, Elsie Walker realized she hadn't just found shelter in the storm, she had found a man whose heart might be thawing too, because of her. The warmth of the Hart Ranch wrapped around Elsie like a dream she was afraid to wake from. Fireplaces roared, the scent of broth drifted through the halls, and blankets swallowed her tiny frame as she sat beside Noah's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with fragile breaths. Doc Kinsley had worked for hours, rubbing warmth into Noah's limbs, feeding him drops of broth, wrapping him in heated cloths. He'll live, the doctor finally said, wiping his brow. But without this rancher finding you when he did, it would have been a different story. Elsie's heart clenched, and she looked toward the doorway where Elias Hart stood, arms crossed, shoulders filling the frame like a mountain. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes kept drifting to Noah, then back to her as though he was measuring, something he didn't yet understand. For 2 days the storm raged outside, sealing them in. Elsie explored the mansion only when workers gently insisted she stretch her legs. She had never seen such a place, polished wooden floors, chandeliers, walls lined with photographs of cowboys, landscapes, and a boy with sandy hair and bright eyes smiling on horseback. Elias caught her staring once, his footsteps heavy behind her. That was my son, he said, voice low enough to stir dust from the memories clinging to the frames. He'd be about your age now. Elsie didn't know what to say, but she whispered, he looks kind. Elias exhaled. Not quite a sigh, not quite a breath. He was. Silence settled, thick but not uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence shared between 2 people who recognized the weight each carried. Later that night, as the storm began to die, Elsie found Elias in the barn brushing his massive stallion. Why did you help us? She asked quietly. Elias paused, hand tightening around the brush. Because you kept walking, he said. Most folks give up long before that. But you dragged your brother through a blizzard. You're the bravest kid I've ever met. Elsie blinked, surprised tears sparkling. I was just scared to lose him. Elias nodded. Courage is just love in motion. Next morning the sun finally broke through the clouds, painting the snow-covered fields with gold. Noah awoke fully for the first time, calling Elsie's name. She rushed to him, hugging him tightly as relief washed through her like sunlight. Elias watched from the doorway, something shifting behind his eyes, softening, awakening, remembering what it felt like to see a child smile. Mr. Hart, Elsie said, turning to him, her voice small but steady. Where will we go now? Elias stepped forward, kneeling so his towering frame didn't seem so intimidating. You're not going anywhere, he said. Not unless you choose to. This ranch has more rooms than I'll ever use, more food than I can eat, and, I could use some laughter again. Elsie's breath hitched. You mean we can stay? Elias nodded. As long as you want, Noah squealed, throwing his arms in the air. And for the first time in years, Elias' heart let out a sound he thought he'd buried forever. Laughter, the kind that carries warmth, hope, and the promise of new beginnings. As the sun climbed higher, melting the ice on the rooftops, Elsie realized something profound. They hadn't just been rescued. They had found a home, and Elias Hart, once the coldest man in Montana, found something too. Two small survivors who thawed the winter around his heart. For anyone listening to their story, for anyone touched by their courage, remember to subscribe, because stories like these deserve to be shared, cherished, and continued.